or questions about what we spoke about last week? Just to give you a quick synopsis, we spoke about figuring out what our patterns are in being critical. And we spoke about the fact that the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot teaches us that some people are critical of their outer circle, meaning if you're my friend or my role model, then you're safe. But if you're the person who I don't know that well, from a different culture, you're the person I'm critical of. Or, we said the other possibility is the people who are very critical of their inner circle. Meaning, if you're my friend or my family or whatever, then you're the one who I'm very critical of. And we said the first one psychologically relates to xenophobia, fear of strangers, people who attribute bad things to people who they don't know. And then we said the inner circle is related to either perfectionism or paranoia, the people who are very critical of the people who they know well. That's what we spoke about last week. And a few of you had asked me, how do I work on not noticing people's weaknesses, or what should I do when I notice people's weaknesses? So we are going to talk about that a little bit more. Any comments or questions on what we spoke about last week? Yes?
I just want to say thank you very much for always explaining your source, for always explaining who the source is before you give the source.
Oh.
Because I don't know a lot of them.
Aha, okay, good. I'll continue to do that because I don't always do that, so good. Yeah.
You said it is possible to be both.
Completely. In fact, it's so interesting. Schoonmaker, who I mentioned last week, the big tzaddik of mine, he says that if you look at who we're critical of, some people are critical of political leaders and general community leaders because you're a leader and you act like that. And then you're critical of the complete layman because you're so simple. What's wrong with you? And then you're critical of the people in between. It's possible to be critical of communities, to be critical of individuals. And then he says, so funnily, he says, there's some people who we're not critical of because they're not even in court anymore. 20 years ago, I decided that they were under me or whatever that was. So if you look around, there's so many places where we're critical. And by the way, the hashkafic criticism that we have towards people of different communities, different hashkafas, different everything, that also fits into this midah. You know, I don't have to agree with your hashkafa, but I don't have to hate you because you're different than me. So there's so many applications for this. Completely, you can be both. Any other questions? I wanted to mention something very interesting, that when we speak about this concept of being God l'kanachot, we think of it as being a ben adam l'chavero thing. But this is really about the way I relate to other people. The real truth is that this midah has ben adam lamakom manifestations, meaning between me and Hashem, ben adam l'chavero between me and people, and ben adam la'atzma between me and myself. I'm going to explain to you how and why. But on the Chavera, we know, if I'm critical of other people, clearly it's an interpersonal concept that's going on here. But where's it between me and God? So I want to explain to you something fantastic. When a lot of the Mefarshim, when they talk about the concept of judging favorably in the different places in the Torah and the Mefarshim on the Mishnah, they say that part of this is about our community having higher standards. Why? Because when you look at somebody favorably and you believe in them, they're more likely to rise to your expectations. So when I walk around and I say, and I think, oh, she's probably not so honest, or she didn't mean well, or she must have been cheating, or So I am kind of creating this circle of suspicion that everybody's suspicious of each other, and everybody thinks that the other guy isn't doing the right thing. And who suffers the most from this? God. You also, we're going to get to the Gemara, says that also. God meaning Hashem wants all of us to maximize our potential. But if we don't believe in each other, then why should we want to maximize our potential? So this really becomes something about, I'll give you even further. Every time a person does an Aveira, if I do an Aveira, there's two aspects of it. There's the aspect of the damage I did to myself, and then there's the aspect called Chilul Hashem. That if other people see me doing an Aveira, they say, oh, her, look what she did. So, it's so interesting. But if people judge me favorably, then at least not so much Chilul Hashem came out of it. Whatever damage was done was between me and Hashem. I did the wrong thing. It wasn't good for my neshama that I did that. But at least people aren't looking saying, oh, look, she's another one who's doing Aveiras all the time. So when we judge each other favorably, there's less Chilul Hashem in the world. And that itself is such an important aspect. I want to give you a fascinating idea that I learned many, many years ago from the Nesiva Shalom, Slonim Rebbe. Nesiva Shalom says, and only someone as great as him could say this. He says that, we all talk about what was called Hashvat HaSviva, the influence of the environment. And what do we talk about? It's good to have good friends, it's good to be around good people influence you well, positive peer pressure is better than negative peer pressure. We could talk about that a lot. He is machadish something unbelievable. He said, do you know that there's something called a psychological peer pressure? Psychological sviva, psychological environment, meaning you could be living among the most religious people in the world, but if you are a critical person and you're saying, she's doing that wrong, she's doing this wrong, she's doing that wrong, you have put yourself in a garbage pail. You're living in Gan Eden, but in your brain, you're living in a garbage pail because all I see and all the people around me are negative. He says the opposite is true also. You could be in an environment where people are not on such a high level. Maybe you're even on the highest level objectively in certain behavior things. But because you view people positively, you're living among tzaddikim. And they have a good influence on you because you're seeing the good in them. And that it's a psychological sviva. And I want to tell you where this is applied. This is applied often in people going into kiruv. Because if you have somebody who's an Orthodox rabbi who moves to a community where nobody's Orthodox, he has two choices in how he's going to be mechanech his children. He could say to his children, look, guys, we're Orthodox here. Them, they're driving on Shabbos. That's not good. Them, they don't dress properly. That's not good. They don't eat kosher. That's not good. And he thinks he's protecting his children by pointing out what everybody else is doing wrong because we're different than them. Do you know what happens, the Slonim Rebbe says? The child starts looking around saying, if everybody else isn't religious around here, why do I have to be the one that sticks out? I want to be like everybody else. And ironically, paradoxically, it could have a negative influence on the child. You're pointing out what everybody's doing wrong, meaning we keep Shabbos, they don't. We do this, they don't. And eventually, the child themselves might lower his standards. Yes?
How do you make him, show him that he is different?
Okay, so I want to talk about that for a second right now. There's a pasuk that we say, Yitamu chata'im min haaretz, that sin should leave the land. And Chazal say on this pasuk, Yitamu chata'im v'lo chut'im. Sin should leave the land and not sinners. Meaning that if you want to have a healthy attitude towards other Jews, I could be sad that you're driving on Shabbos, but I want the concept of driving on Shabbos to leave. I don't want you to not be here anymore. And we need to educate our children, and this is very important. If you want your child to have a high level of tzniut, let's say, for example, you have two choices. You could say, you shouldn't wear that kind of clothing. You know the one that Mrs. Schwartz wears, that outfit that she was wearing on Shabbos? Don't wear that. Or you could teach a child objectively, this is our standard of tzniut. The child is smart enough, you know what, when she sees Mrs. Schwartz, she knows that Mrs. Schwartz is not wearing the right outfit, but you don't have to point that out to the child. You're using Mrs. Schwartz to teach your method, but you're teaching the child to be critical. Teach the child objectively what kashrut is and what tzniut is and what morality is and what ethics are, but don't say, not like that person who did this wrong. Because you're teaching a child to associate sin with people and then to dislike people. A smart child, when you teach them a principle, they know when people are keeping it or not keeping it. But you don't have to, and let's do the opposite. The only way you use people, the only time you mention Mrs. Schwartz, is when you're pointing at something positive. Because then they learn to look for the good in people. And this is called the psychological siva. So this is a little counter. But let's say the Orthodox rabbi, comes to the community, and nobody's Shomer Shabbos there, and people are not dressing on standard. But he points out, he says, you know that family, the Schwartzes? They're trying so hard. They're really trying. Do you know this family? They give a lot of tzedakah. Do you know this lady? She volunteers in hospitals all the time. What happens to the child? The child feels he's in an environment of people who are growing. And then what's the peer pressure? To grow. So it becomes a psychological thing. If you feel you're living among good people and you're noticing the good in them, they will have a good influence on you. If you feel you're living among bad people who are doing the wrong things, they will have a bad influence on you. And the Slonim Rebbe goes so far, only he could say this, as to say, let's see, he said, don't take your child to a Chillul Shabbos demonstration. A demonstration where people are talking about, the frum people are demonstrating against the fact that other people are not keeping Shabbos. He says, don't take your child to one of those demonstrations. Why? Because they learn about Chillul Shabbos from the demonstration. They look and they say, wow, there's so many people who don't keep Shabbos. And you think that you're making the child strong. No, we're in favor of Shabbos. What are you doing? The child, if he's susceptible to peer pressure, after seeing a lot of people not keeping Shabbos, is like, why do I have to be the religious one around here? It's fun to drive on Shabbos. So we have to realize this concept of Dan L'Kavzchut, of judging favorably, is not just about the way I relate to you. It's also about what my religious standards are going to be. Now, I think, and I want to get back to what you said, it's very important to teach your children high standards. We're not saying everything goes and it doesn't matter, Shabbos, no Shabbos, everything's great. When it comes to the level of standards, you teach your child every inspiring source you have to teach them about Shabbos, about snooze, about anything you want. But when it comes to people, you're looking for the good in what they're doing, and you're assuming that the child is smart enough to know what they're not doing right. You don't have to be in the child's face. And I have to tell you that as a parent, anytime I fall into the temptation of pointing at someone and saying, that's not the kind of outfit we wear, it never had a good influence on my children. Because they don't like it. They sense that you're using somebody. Okay, Mommy, you want me to go up and sneak, but we're going down in Lashon Hara, or we're going down in something.
What about if the kid brings it up? Like, Mommy, why is she wearing that? Won't we not do that? You don't like
Okay, so then we can say, we don't do that. But then there's the concept of judging the whole person, meaning we don't do that. I have this a lot with relatives who are not religious, right? So, so they'll come and they'll try to be respectful, and then they'll take my kids to the park. And one time my 4-year-old daughter comes running home, she says, Uncle Sam or Uncle whatever it was, he was doing a little Aveira at the park, because kids pick this up. At a young age of a 4-year-old, I could say, yeah, he didn't go to the same kind of school you went to and he doesn't know. When they get older, you know what they say? So let's teach him, right? To which we have to say, people have different life circumstances. Some people weren't lucky enough necessarily to have the same exposures or even the same desire to be the way you are. But we respect him for who he is, even though we do things differently. Right? The child can know that the thing is an Avera. I'm not trying to whitewash that. But I'm not trying to them to think that this person is bad. This person has had different exposures in life, and even his motivation to change is different.
I know a certain situation, like I know a girl, she's like 11, but her whole class wears like pants. So she doesn't, because she comes from home, but she goes to her mother and says like, oh, I want to wear pants. But like the mother, she says, we don't do that, but maybe they don't know better, but what would you, but she still wants to, what else would you tell the girl?
I want to tell you something, that this idea of living among people who all have different standards, I just had this question came up last night, a certain woman called me exactly about this kind of a thing. And there's a completely different thing called what environment is it smart to put your child in or not. There's a famous person who gives a lot of parenting classes here. Her name is Sima Spetner. I don't know if anybody's heard of her. She's very, very well known here. And she says to parents who want their child to only wear skirts in a class where everyone's wearing pants. She says, you should know from the child's perspective, if there's something that 60% of the kids in the class are doing, you're giving an obstacle to your child by expecting them not to do it. Meaning, if the child is inspired, I was a rabbi's daughter in a very minor Orthodox community, right? And I had to dress very different than everybody else. For me, it was fun. I didn't mind. I didn't care. I had a sister who couldn't stand it. Meaning, after 60% of an environment is doing something, then the nature of the child to want to fit in is going to be very, very strong. Okay? Now, certain kids will rise to the occasion, certain kids won't. So what would she say? What would she say? She would say, then you have to reward the child for not wearing pants, because it's not easy to not wear pants if everybody in the class is wearing. You see? Or you have to think about, maybe if it's such a struggle for this child, move to a different community or send them to a different school. But for you to say, no, we're proud of who we are, and you could be the only sore thumb in your class, it's hard for a child. When someone grows up, they pick their own values, and they don't mind standing out. But for a young child, it's a big struggle. So I would say in such a situation, that the child has to feel special. First of all, they have to feel lucky to be who they are, which is a chinuch thing, that a child feels lucky that they come from a certain kind of home. But also they need to be rewarded because it's very difficult. And that's true, by the way, she says it about designer clothing. If you send to this upscale school where everybody's wearing designer clothing, and you're saying to your child, no, we don't believe in designer clothing. Well, if 60-70% of the kids in the class are wearing it, it's not so fair to expect the child not to want to wear it. Then you have to figure out what you want to do. You want to reward the child for not wearing it. You want to send the child to a different school. You want to change your standards. But it's hard to expect the child to rise to that. Yeah.
About that, what if they're a teenager? Now, I'm not talking about college, I'm talking about like they're in high school, and for some reason they have to go to public school, and a lot of like most people wear pants, like what are you going to do? They're a teenager and they're going to want to because they stick out. They're going to wear like they're going to want to wear pants because everyone does it.
Right, right. I think you have to be very sympathetic to the fact that you chose as a parent to put the child in an environment which is very difficult for him. And then you have to be very sympathetic to the child. Meaning either you're going to change your school or you're going to do something that makes them understand that you're asking them to do something difficult and they deserve a reward for it. I would reward a child for sticking to a family standard in a situation which is very hard for them because that's hard. How do you reward? Same way you reward for any kind of behavioral thing that you want to do. You know what? This is a completely different topic, not our topic. But you know what Sima Spetner says about snoot in general for children? She says, you as mothers, if you're going to have a certain standard of snoot and your child is going to challenge you a little bit, you have to be willing to spend a lot of money to get to a win-win with that child. Because that child needs to feel she looks pretty. And you want a certain standard. And you can't expect the child to be the tzaddik as, well, look, you have to look at... She said, no, you're the parent. You're the mature person. You're the one with the values. You have to go shopping with that child until she finds something that she thinks looks really nice on her and you think is the proper standard. And if it costs triple the price of the other thing, you have to pay for it. It's your problem, not the child's problem. And she says, forget it. She says, if you're encouraging snoot among your children, then, and this happens to me all the time, you finally find the right thing that looks proper beside snoot, and you hate the color. She says, forget it. If the child likes it and it's bright orange, let her buy it. Because if it fits the standards, then you cannot afford to have the child, they have to feel they look good. Meaning that we have to realize that for children, as adults, we have value systems where we realize that there's a trade-off and we're willing to do it. A child, you have to compensate the child. The child has to feel good about the way they look. And if it means, she says to the mothers when the kids are babies, start saving money now because it's going to be expensive. Because if the child feels that she doesn't look attractive in a lot of clothing and finally finds something that she likes that you think is of standard, you have to pay for it. So I'm not sure everybody would agree, but I think that it teaches a child that they don't have to suffer. An adult could say, I'm choosing to sacrifice something for religion. For a young child, there are enough things when you can't eat milk after meat, enough things. But if it comes to something where there is a win-win, but it's just more money, that's a place to make the child feel, you know what? I want you to look beautiful. I'll pay. Yes.
Isn't it? I feel like it would be hard, at least for me as a child, to think like if Uncle Sam is doing it, then he wasn't lucky enough to get the education, and we still love him, even though he's different than us. Then why wouldn't I think to myself well, then why can't I be different and my family will still love me? Obviously.
Right. Okay, so you're leading me to the point, getting back to our topic, because that's a very important aspect. As adults, I'm going to give you an adult way of thinking of it, and then we're going to have to think about how a child thinks about it. As an adult thinks of it, I have to feel that my religious level or my success in my religious development is like winning a lottery. Okay, did we talk about the Siyata Dishmaya factor last week? Did I go into that at all? Not sounding familiar? One of the reasons why we're critical, it's very interesting, when we're critical of other people, you know what, let me go back a little bit more. The Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Ayin, says something about what we're critical of. Did I get to that at all last week? What? I mentioned it, Kol Posel, the Momo Posel, did I mention that? Oh, no, okay. Okay, so let me explain. The inner outer is who I'm critical of. Meaning some people, the topic, it's not going to be about a topic, it's going to be about a person. If I'm critical of my child, I can be critical of a lot of things about them. And if I'm not critical, I'm not critical. For some people, it doesn't even have to do with inner circle or outer circle. It has to deal with topic. If I'm very conscious of nutrition, I can't help but notice all the people who feed their kids food coloring all day, right? Meaning it's not about you. It doesn't matter. You could be my daughter, you could be my cousin, you could be the person from across the street. It's not about the person, it's about the topic. And that is based on the Gemara in Kiddushin Ayin, which says, Kol ha-posel b'mumo posel. What does this mean? Kol ha-posel b'mumo posel means that anybody who negates another person, it's coming from their own weakness. The Gemara then also goes on to say something which sounds similar but it's different. Kol ha-posel pasul. Anybody who negates others is negative himself, is pasul himself. What's the difference? Yes. Kol ha-posel, anybody who pasul, like anybody who negates something or says something is not good, bimumo posel, with his blemish, he is negating other people. Bimumo, mum means like a blemish, bimumo posel. So I'll say it again. Kol ha-posel, bimumo posel. Yes?
What if you're negative for something positive others?
What's that?
What if you're a negative person but they positive?
For you're positive of others. That's pretty good. That means you're doing well vis-a-vis this mita, that you don't see other people in a negative light. That's great. I mean, we're going to talk about that at some point in the year. That's more about self-esteem. Everybody's great and I'm not great. But at least I'm not critical of other people, which is a good thing. But the Gemara is telling you something fascinating. What does kol posel b'mumo posel mean? In the English expression, you ever hear the expression, it takes one to know one? That's what that Gemara means. It means you're selfish. And that's why you notice all the selfish people. And you're always complaining about everybody being so selfish. Because really, you know what selfishness is. You don't like to admit that it's in yourself, but you project it on, you know it. So you project it onto other people and you see it in everybody else. The Gemara is telling you something interesting. The first thing you do when you start criticizing somebody is you ask yourself, where is this midah in me? Do I have any weakness in this area? And that's kol ha-posel b'mumo posel. Ask myself, what's going on here? Why am I so aware of this? What's bothering me here? Some people come back to me and they say to me, you know what? It's really not my problem. I actually come on time all the time. That's why I'm critical of people who don't come on time. Meaning, sometimes it's because I recognize it in myself. That's why I see it in people. But sometimes it's not like that. And then the Gemara gives us this umbrella term, which is kol ha-posel pasul. Anybody who negates others, he himself is not, something's wrong with him. So if I can't find the relationship between the thing I'm critical of and where it is in me, then I ask myself a wider question. Why am I obsessing about what other people are doing? Why is everybody on my radar screen? Why is she in the radar screen, my radar screen? Why am I thinking about them so much? Because there must be something off with me if I'm obsessing about what's wrong with you. And that's much wider. So the Gemara is giving you a first stage is look for a relationship to you with the topic. And if you can't find one, then ask yourself in a wider sense, why do I have to be condescending? Like why do I have to look down on people? Yes?
So in that case, your blemish thing would be being negative. It wouldn't be that
Right,
selfish.
exactly.
Selfishness is
Maybe I'm not
other.
confident. Yes. I'm negative, or, it's very interesting, there's a Gemara in Megillah. There's one of the Amoram, his name was Rav Nechonya. And Rav Nechonya had his students came to him. He lived to a very old age. And they said to him, Bima ha'arachta yamim? Why were you zocha to old age, to live so long? And his answer was interesting. He said, Miyamai, these are hard words, I'll repeat them. Miyamai lo nitzkabadati b'klon chaverai. Yes. Okay. Miyamai lo nitzkabadati. From kavod, from Lashon kavod. B'kalon. Kalon means the disgrace. Chaverai, of my friends. That, you see it? Mi'amai lo nitzkabadati b'klon chaverai. This is a fascinating Gemara. It means I never got kavod. I never elevated myself from somebody else's downfall, somebody else's disgrace. What does it mean on a deeper level? Some people, where does their self-esteem come from? The fact that I'm better than other people. At least I don't do that. I never benefited from other people's disgrace or other people's downfall. And here we learn a very interesting concept. Kol haposel pasul, the second thing, the umbrella thing is, why am I getting a kick from the fact that you're doing something wrong? What's that? It makes me feel better about myself. What, is that what you said? What did you say? Yeah. But that's not a good source of feeling good about myself. I can feel good about myself that I'm trying, that I'm growing, but I'm not supposed to get a kick from seeing that you didn't do something right. There's something off about that. And I have to ask myself, why am I enjoying the fact that you're not doing well? And that's the bigger question. Meaning, this is the Gemara in Megillah. Rav Nechonia. When they asked him, why did you live to a ripe old age? He said, because I never enjoyed the disgrace of my friends. So clearly this is not an easy thing, because if he said that that's why he was zocha to old age, that was like, it's a big thing. But it teaches you something. Where is the source of my self-esteem? Is it coming from feeling that other people are less than me? I could be objectively proud of my accomplishments. That's good. But to say that I'm happy that I'm better than you, that's not good. Yes?
Then what's healthy self-esteem?
Okay, we are going to have to deal with this as a topic. Healthy self-esteem is understanding, first of all, there's a certain non-conditional love that God has for me, even when I'm not yet fulfilling my potential. But added on that unconditional love is the fact that I am using the specific kochot that Hashem gave me to give what I can to the world. So it's knowing myself, knowing what I have to offer, knowing my weaknesses, and not comparing myself to anybody. Just appreciating and using what's me. That's healthy self-esteem. What's that? Unhealthy is the comparative. I'm better than you, I'm worse than you. Any comparison to anybody else is not healthy. We always say low self-esteem, oh, everyone's better than me. Thinking that you're better than everybody is also not good self-esteem. As soon as there's the comparisons going, it's already not. Because self-esteem is coming from a self-contained place of me in this world vis-a-vis God and what I can accomplish, what I have to offer, the fact that He loves me when I'm doing well, when I'm not doing well, He also loves me. But as soon as I'm looking around and comparing myself to others, then already the source is not so healthy. But we're going to talk about that more. Yes?
It's on that question, so you don't have to
Sure.
answer it, but the only reason you'd know if you're tall or short is by looking around you.
Yes, yes. Okay, that's a very good point. But the question really is, how am I supposed to know my standards if I don't compare myself? Okay, but the point is, I have to believe that Hashem gave me a certain amount of chomer, that's good and bad. Chomer is the God-given gift that Hashem gives a person when they're born. Some of that is great and some of that is bad. Now, I have to understand, it's true that you look around society and society kind of sets a standard. But Lamaisa, you can look around at people who are all smiley. But if you're suffering from low serotonin levels, it's nice to look at everybody, but God is not judging you that you're not smiling like them. You understand? I would be nice to be like them. But my self-esteem is not, I'm not smiley like her. You know what? Because Homer really is about the amount of God-given gift. Some Homer, we see it in biology. By now, everybody knows that happiness and anxiety and all these things are very, very biologically based. So here I am walking around, everybody's in a great mood, and I'm feeling tense because I'm prone to anxiety. Now, I might look at them and say, I would love to be like that one day. But I'm not feeling bad about myself because God knows the challenges that He gave me. If He wired me to be an anxious person, He's going to celebrate me on the slightest little development that nobody else will even notice.
It could be that you're, like, that can also be like an excuse you're using there.
Okay, you have to be very honest and know if you're growing within your category. But the race, quote unquote, is only against yourself. It's not against somebody else. I think that all to talk about happiness. You know, we're going to get closer to Adar. We'll deal with the topic of simcha. So you have some people who are smiley all day in all situations, and Hashem gives schar for everything, but they don't even try. And then you have a person who, to put a smile on their face once a day, God is celebrating them because that's so hard for them. So as soon as you are comparing yourself to somebody else, you're not appreciating that Hashem is relating to you through your chomer. And I, with my one smile, might be getting more schar than her smiling all day, because for me, that's a challenge. And that's the problem. My self-esteem comes from the fact that, look, everybody here is so happy and calm and growing and wonderful. God is comparing you to yourself. And that's where we're going to deal with it more in depth for sure this year as a topic. Yes.
Can you please repeat what that means?
Okay. I never got respect. I never elevated myself through the disgrace or the downfall of my friends. And I didn't get a kick out of somebody else's messing up. Okay, that's not what put me in a good mood. Yes.
That means that from like a perspective, then like if you're rewarding a child for doing what's hard for them, like because we place so much like importance on that versus like here's what other people are doing. We're not doing it, but like I'm so proud of you that you're doing it. Then you have to put like a special like stress on the fact that it's not because they're worse than you. It's because like how do you reward a kid then? How do you say like I'm so proud of you for doing the right thing and find that everyone else is doing the wrong thing. Like we also don't like get covered out of other people's
Because you were born into a certain family, and this family has certain standards, and this is your education, and this is your wiring, and my expectations for you are based on who you are. Rav Dessa talks about this in Kuntres Bechira, if anybody's ever learned it. You know what I'm saying? The robber who was going to murder and decides not to murder, for him, that's a step up on his Bechira point. For somebody who was born as a tzaddik, that's not going to be where he's going to get his schar. Everybody gets their sachar in Bechira based on where they are on the totem pole and where their challenges. So to compare a tzaddik to a robber is not realistic. I'm comparing you to you. And you know what, even among siblings, one of the healthiest things is to reward each child for what his standards are and what's difficult for him. The worst thing is when you compare him to his brother, and then Chomer is not just different in different families; it's different within the same family. You see, certain people are wired in a certain way, and certain people aren't. So we have to stop looking and judging other people. Okay, did you want to ask something? Okay, so I want to just explain, as an adult, how do I view what I have, what I'm doing right versus what other people. It's kind of an extension of what you just asked now. So Schoonmaker has something very interesting to say. He says, when you have good chomer in a certain area, we're often critical of people who don't. If you're a very on-time person and you know people who come late, you're driven crazy by their coming late, right? So the first thing you say to yourself is, God gave me a gift called good chomer in this area, and I won the lottery. So why am I being critical of people who didn't? And that's very often we're critical of not an area where we're weak, but an area where we're strong and other people are weak. We just can't understand why they have such a hard time with that. And here, the answer is God wired me differently. He gave me this gift that this thing is not hard for me, and I have to be sympathetic to the fact that it's hard for somebody else. So why am I being critical? It's almost like if I won a lottery, I'm going to be critical of a poor person who didn't win the lottery. I'll pray for you that you should win the lottery, but I'm not going to be critical of you for not winning it. So chomer is like winning the lottery. I have good chomer in a certain area. I was born, now you're going to say to me, and this is even more difficult, what if I don't have good chomer in the area, but I worked on myself? And I'm critical of people who are not working on themselves. I used to look exactly like her. I used to talk like her. I used to do it all the same. But I got my act together. Why can't she? What do we say to such a person? Yes.
That they had different priorities in working on themselves. Maybe there was something else that they were bad in and that now they're better at, but you don't know that because you didn't meet them when they were still working on that category.
Exactly. I'm going to put it even in a bigger context, but that's the direction. Yes.
In terms of explaining your different standards to the child, would it be appropriate to say, well, other families who are super into music, they teach their kids all about music, and they have standards about music. We don't know much about music, so you can give them an example like, my parents never stressed a huge importance on music to me.
Right.
They never learned it. Their parents never told them that music was super important and focus of their lives.
Right.
So just like my family never taught me about, this makes a piece of music really, really good and top quality.
Exactly.
Their parents maybe never got taught about music either.
Right. I think that we always have to look when I spoke about the idea last week of the slip coming down and then looking at your own. There are clearly areas where people are gifted that I'm not, and I have to be able to notice that and to realize that it's not that I have it all by me. I might have it here, but I might not have it in some other area. I wanted to say about this. The extension here is very interesting. What if yes?
I was But back to the thing about, like if you will join it and she's,
Yes.
all just like that.
Yes.
I guess like my thing would be like, so like she's just a different step in the process. Like when I used to look like that, I wouldn't have wanted somebody who was one step ahead to judge me because I was working on it, and then maybe she's working on it, she's not up to it yet, she's in the way of it yet.
Okay. Okay. That is good if you don't know the person or if you know that the person is in a process. Sometimes, imagine you have twin sisters, let's say, I don't know, and they went to the same school, same family, same education, same exposures. One of them is inspired by something, and the other one is like rebellious about it. So I can't even say she's in a process because she's in an anti-process right now. I think you're right because in many situations people are in a process and we're not the ones to know. But let's say somebody who you know really, really, really well, and you're all inspired and she's like, I'm turned off by that. So you can't even say, she's just a step behind, she'll get there soon, because she's telling you, no, I'm against it. So what do you say in I'm giving you an extreme situation, but what would you say when it doesn't even seem the person's in a process? So here's a very fascinating thing that Schoonmaker says, and I really like this idea. He says, we are often very critical when we worked on something and we see other people didn't. Because we're saying, she can get her act together, she could be like me, it wasn't easy for me either. He says, what are you doing? You're being about gaiva, about your accomplishments. You're very, I got there. Come on, get your act together. He's saying that even though you are attributing your level to your efforts, you still don't know the ratio between your efforts and how much siyata d'shmaya you had in that area. Meaning, I think that I got there because I worked really, 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 really hard. He's saying, you're saying 95% is my effort. And I'm going to say back to you, 95% is the fact that you went to that shir and you were inspired and somehow it worked for you and you got the right guidance and and the other person went to the same shir and wasn't inspired. Meaning, a lot of our success has to do with siyata d'shmaya. I was inspired, that hit me a certain way, it affected me, I took it seriously, I started going with it. You're attributing your success to your hard work, but you don't know the balance between your hard work and the gifts that God gave you, that it went well for you. And therefore, it's the lottery thing again. Clearly, this person who has the same education as me and the same exposures and didn't get there, did not have that gift of being inspired. It didn't hit her the same way. But when something hits you a certain way and it doesn't hit somebody else, that's a gift. So instead of feeling angry or critical of the person who was not inspired, you say, I got the gift of wanting to work on myself in this area. And then I could pray for her that she should get that gift too. But I'm not the rich person who's angry at somebody who's poor. And that's the way we view people's lack of development, is that clearly in this area they're not inspired, that's for sure, right? If they're like what you're saying, that they are inspired, but they're just a little bit behind, so then that's great. But even if they're saying, no way, I got the gift of inspiration in this area and they didn't. So I'm not going to be angry at somebody who doesn't have a gift. Yeah.
What happens when it's not like a situation where it's like winning the lottery? Like, something like coming to class late, it's like understandable, it's a more broad concept, some people struggle. What if it's like basic tact? Like that's something that should be common sense.
Can I tell you that that's one of the biggest areas where this applies? Let's talk about Homer. If you read any of Daniel Goleman's books, Daniel Goleman is the one who popularized the concept of emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence has to do with Homer. There are kids who will walk over to the neighbor and very tactfully say, Mrs. Cohen, you look so nice today, when they're 3 years old. And then there are the kids who'll say, look at Mrs. Cohen's green dress. You know what I'm saying? What is that? They weren't even educated yet. Because people are born. Emotional intelligence, which includes tact, is something that some people are so lacking, not because they don't work on it, because either they come from a family that's like that, or they're just not gifted. My husband was telling me that a certain man was talking to him about the fact that he has a son who gets into trouble socially in school because he's totally lacking tact and says all the wrong things, and nobody wants to be his friend. My husband said, I didn't say it to the father, but I'm thinking, you're like that too. The father didn't even realize his kid's lacking social skills because the father's lacking social skills. But this child did not wake up one day and say, I want to be tactless. Tact is a gift. It's completely a gift. Now, could it also be acquired? Yes. Could it be that some people don't acquire it because they don't even realize they're missing it? Yes. But I would say it is a gift. It's one of the areas where it's strongly a gift. Because the studies show that things like intuition and emotional intelligence, social intelligence is something that is much easier for people who are gifted with it and very hard to acquire. It's possible to acquire it, but it's hard to. We're going to talk about social intelligence at one point over the year. It's like this gift that some people like are so good at. You know, they walk into a situation that's really sticky, they say just the right thing and everybody likes them. Somebody else, even when they're trying to compliment people, they end up offending them, you know? But they're not choosing to be that way. It's they just don't know what to do. Just keep an eye on that. Okay, we have a few more minutes. Yes?
I feel like that's actually harder to like, that's a harder reality because if you're born with a lot of, like, I don't know, I'm very socially nuanced, I always have been, so then if I see somebody, if I'm interacting with somebody who's not socially nuanced at all, that like frustrates me that well, then why, if I got the gift, and thank God and I won the lottery, but then why do I still have to like deal so much with people who didn't win the lottery? So then why can't I just have to deal with people who did win the lottery also? And like that's so hard.
That's exactly what we mean. You need to access compassion towards the people who don't have it instead of feeling annoyed by them. Okay? Yeah.
So, wouldn't it be better though to approach a child in this more adult way of thinking? Because if you approach a child in the way that if you stay to a standard and then you're going to get rewarded, when they grow up, it's going to be so much harder to have that perspective change of, oh, it's a gift that I got all these things and that, that I was rewarded as a child, so it taught me this. Wouldn't it just be better, because like I think that we don't give kids enough credit. Like they can pick up on things. Like my little sister's in public school also, but like for her, it's like, well, what's right for us is right for us. What's right for them is right for them. And like she can understand that, and I think that most kids can understand that.
I totally agree with you. I think the first step is that you have to educate to values and people being proud of what they have and to feel lucky with what they have and to not even need the gift. But when you have a child who still struggles, either because they're not emotionally mature enough or because it's so hard to do what everyone else is not doing, then you have to be sympathetic to their difficulty. You see? But if you can get away with, if they just on the level of their values could say, wow, okay, this is what I have and I'm proud of it. But you'll see at certain developmental stages, even the Gemara says that a little child, when you teach him Torah, you put honey on the letters for him to lick it. Why? Because within a few years he's going to enjoy Torah for what it is. But for now, it needs to even feel sweet and taste sweet. So for a young child to say, well, this is our value system, and you have Siyata Dishmaya, might not work. But if it works, I totally agree with you. It's better than becoming dependent on some external, thing completely. Because not everything in life is rewarded. That's the truth. I agree with you. Yes?
Okay, back to what Sunny said about the tact thing. I have a lot of trouble with that. Like, I'm very blunt about a lot of things. And I can tell you for a fact that the only reason that I don't put my foot in my mouth as often as I used to is because I've been interacting with people who do have tact and I've been learning from them.
That's nice.
So
that's
nice.
nice.
Also a part of it.
That's nice. That's nice. It literally is one of the biggest, most natural Homer things that's around, this thing of tact, even more than other things. Okay, I want to just end up with two ideas quickly. I said to you that that this mitzvah is good for the interpersonal, it's good for the intrapersonal, and it's good for my relationship with God. There's a very interesting source by someone called Rav Yedaya Hapnini. He lived in the time of the Rambam, and he also wrote a parish on Pirkei Avot, Yedaya Hapnini, not well known. He talks about this idea of judging favorably. He says something fascinating. I love this idea. He says, what do you do when you judge people favorably? Back to our last week's, the kindergarten example of somebody walk into McDonald's, they're munching on something, are you supposed to think that they ate a kosher sandwich or not kosher sandwich? He says, what do you do when you judge favorably? When you judge favorably, you're in an ambiguous situation. Ambiguous means when good and bad are mixed together. I don't really know. There's certain things that seem that are clearly right. This is ambiguous. I'm not quite sure. What did she mean by that comment? Did she mean to insult me or did she not mean to insult me? Or why did she run past that old lady without helping her? Did she see her or did she not see her? Right? I'm not sure. I have good options and bad options mixed together. When you are dan l'kaf zchut, You are taking the good option and you're moving it towards you, and you're moving the bad option away. She probably didn't see that old lady. She probably didn't mean to say that tactless thing. She probably wasn't eating the not kosher sandwich. So I'm pushing away the bad options and I'm bringing the good ones close. That's what Dan L'Kavzchut is. I have good options and bad options. I'm choosing the good and pushing away the bad. The Avizaya Pnini says something fascinating. He says, you know what this does for you over time? In your personal life, unrelated to other people, sometimes you have to make decisions. And you don't know what's good and what's bad. Should I major in this in college or should I major in that? Should I marry the guy? Should I not marry the guy? We're not sure. He said, if you were Dan L'Kavzchut a lot in your life, you got used to extracting good and pushing away bad. It will affect your personal decisions as well. You'll be a better decision maker because life is mixed up. Good options and bad options are mixed together. But you got used to smelling out good things and bringing it towards you and pushing away the bad. That will affect your decision making. I thought that was fascinating, that it could affect you in that way. So I once told this over in a shir, and there was a girl who was in the class who was in Neve Yerushalayim, and she was learning about Hilchot Shabbos. And she said that the rabbi who was teaching them was teaching them about borer. And one of the conditions about borer, one of the ways you're allowed to do borer on Shabbos, is if you take good over the bad. So he says, girls, on Shabbos you have to pick the good over the bad, and try to do this in other areas of life as well. It's good for you to choose good over bad. So it was like the same kind of idea, that really, when you get used to choosing good over bad in the way you relate to people, and then you get better in your personal decision making. I want to just end with one beautiful idea that Schoonmaker says. We say, Havei dam et kol ha'adam l'kavzchut. Judge the whole person favorably. What happens when we're critical? We're taking a magnifying glass and we're looking at one aspect of this person, their lack of tact, or their coming late, or the way they dress, or the way they talk, whatever it is. He says, you know what it's like? I love the way he describes it. He says, if you were to go to a museum and look at a world-famous picture, you're looking at the Mona Lisa in Paris. What do people do? People, when they're looking at a world-famous picture, they stand back and they take in the whole picture. Imagine if one tourist came into the Louvre and was looking at the Mona Lisa, takes out their magnifying glass and goes close to the picture and focuses on a little speck on the corner of the picture. While all the tourists are going like this, taking it all in, you think that this tourist was a little off, right? He says, what we don't understand is that every Jew is a work of art. Stand back and take in the whole person. When you're just focusing on the one thing that you can't get out of your brain that they're doing wrong, you're taking a magnifying glass and you're going in. But if you understood that a Jew is a work of art, you'd stand back and you try to understand the whole person. There's so much good about this person. Okay, so they're not perfect, either am I. But that's kol ha'adam. And it's so beautiful to leave. I'll leave you with this idea that every Jew is a work of art. That's the message of Dan L'Kavzchut. And that's what I want to leave you with today. Okay, so we're ending up this topic. You definitely are welcome to bring up questions about it if you want. But I would like you to continue to focus on trying to figure out if there's a topic particularly that I'm critical of, and where does this topic relate to me, or what does it teach me about myself? Okay? Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good week.
So when you were talking about choose the good option.
Thank you.
And push away the bad option. That's like the whole.
Does somebody want to give this back to her? Thank you very much.
What popped in my head was the whole